Grateful to have you all in the same space. It's always nice. We do a lot of these like in webinar formats, but this one is way better because I get to actually see humans on the far side. Virtual learning's already hard, and then when you remove any faces whatsoever, you're just talking into the void. So it's good to see some faces here. Thanks for showing up. If we have not had a chance to meet yet, virtually or in person, my name is Houston. I'm one of the co-founders of CharacterStrong. And today we're just going to spend a little bit of time talking through the elementary toolkit, Purposeful People. I'll talk a bit high level about sort of philosophically how we built it, why we built it. I'll get into the weeds a little bit around implementation and all sort of the tools that you could potentially use in your building across your district. And then we'll spend some time making sure we get questions answered, because I know that's always key. Everyone has unique needs, especially coming into this year, so we'll try to answer as many of those as possible. That being said, let me share my screen. And I know for some folks, my guess is just about everyone here at some point along the way has had their screen taken over, like I just did to you. But just in case you use Google Meet or something different in Zoom's a little bit less familiar to you, if you don't like that I just took over your whole screen, you can always double click on the screen or hit escape. Or there's a little button that says exit full screen if you want to have multiple things open at once. So if you at any point need to ask a question, you can send it to us in the chat channel. You can send it to Lindsay directly, or you can send it publicly, whatever's best for you. We'll compile all those in a little document so that I make sure I try to get all those questions answered by the end. So any question you have as you come up, just drop it into the chat and we will get to it right towards the end. We're also going to record today's meeting, so if you need to like send this off to someone or follow up with anything, you can do that as well. So I'm going to start here on this overview tab, and a couple things you'll notice right away. The first one is that organizationally we go by CharacterStrong, and our secondary content, grades 6 through 12, is all branded and called CharacterStrong. Our elementary piece is distinctly and importantly called Purposeful People. So one of the things that we learned early on as schools were adopting our secondary work, they're like, what do we have for elementary? And as we started to build it out, one of the things that was the advice from people in schools, in buildings, in districts, they said, we want to make sure that we're doing this work district-wide, pre-K through 12th grade. And what we've learned from implementing other things district-wide is if we call it the same thing, elementary and secondary, then by the time kids get to secondary, they're quote unquote done with it because it feels elementary to them, because we already did whatever that thing was called in elementary school. Just the fact that it's called the same thing can sometimes turn kids off. So in an attempt to avoid that, and because we wanted to focus on really cultivating a sense of purpose and identity, especially with the little ones, we call our elementary toolkit Purposeful People. You'll hear me use that word toolkit a lot, and that's intentional. Another thing that we learned along the way is that the model for social emotional learning, or character at the elementary level, I was humbled to learn that the elementary teacher's schedule is actually more tight than the secondary. Like, time is even more scarce at the elementary level, which is why prescriptive curriculums don't work as well, probably in part because they're not preferred. So we built it intentionally as a toolkit model, or the mutually adaptive approach, so that teachers can integrate it into their classroom in more natural, organic ways, and in ways that sort of fit what they need in their schedule. And what we think about from a classroom model, we also can expand that out to a campus model. It should not be a one-size-fits-all solution. So what are you already doing in your school to talk about some of the things like courage or kindness or respect? Well, great. Let's come alongside that and support those things, as opposed to being this like prescriptive thing. So all that being said, the toolkit is designed as a toolkit model with some really practical implementation strategies pre-built for you. I'll get to that in just a minute. Final piece of the puzzle, when we're talking about the toolkit, we're covering a couple of different specific topics. And they are all listed right here on the side, as well as right here. And these topics were not invented out of thin air. They come from survey data from parents and from families, from educators, and from students themselves, asking questions like, what sort of person do you want to be? What skills do you want more of in your life or in the young people that you serve? And these 10 words or some variation of them rose to the top of those lists. So it's sort of organic. People said, these are what we want for ourselves or for the people that we work with or our kids. And so we said, cool, let's take the top 10 of those things. Let's build a bunch of tools around those so schools have lots of ways to integrate those really practically. Final thing that I'll share that'll sort of set the stage for what I'm about to show you next is we believe deeply in always the holistic approach. So it can't just be a 30-minute a week thing and see you next week. Not how it's going to work in terms of practical long-term culture change. So what are we doing to provide lots of supports, not only in the classroom, but what are we doing to focus on adult behavior change, to provide tools for the staff in the building? What are we doing to provide support and tools for families so that the conversation can continue beyond the school day? And what are we doing on the playground where we know actually our biggest behavior issues are typically occurring? Of course, some of those things will have to be reimagined in the current reality of a lot of schools. All that said, I'll show you each of those pieces of the puzzle and see if we have questions that come up. So if I come in here, you'll notice that this is the actual curriculum website that you're looking at right now. And if I come over here, there's 10 different traits, the ones I just mentioned, that you could choose from. Things like courage, respect, perseverance, gratitude, honesty, kindness, empathy, responsibility, cooperation, and creativity. All things that I think we want more for ourselves and for the young people that we get to work with. And so we went to work building tools around each of these. I like this set of words, partially because it is, to me, a really nice intersection of social emotional learning and character development, right? Sort of two worlds that sometimes get lumped together. Sometimes they run parallel or separate from each other altogether. And really at CharacterStrong, we believe that we need both. We need the character traits, which are those like behavioral things. What are we doing as people in the world? And those social emotional skills, which sort of categorically I think of as more of the things that live underneath. Right? That sense of emotional management or empathy, which then informs my capacity to choose kindness in the world. So let's take empathy as an example. That'll be the one I'll walk through today. But what I show you here in empathy will be replicated with, of course, its own different variations and focuses for each of these 10 other, or these 9 other traits for a total of 10. So if I come into empathy here on the side and I come down, you'll see a bunch of different categories, different things you can unpack with empathy. So let's start with adults, because that's where it should start. My favorite line from Dr. Clayton Cook, who we work with in the research world, he says, when it comes to school culture change, we are first and foremost in the business of adult behavior change. So what are we doing to provide adults practical, low burden ways to role model the sorts of traits we're trying to cultivate in children? So these are called purposeful pursuits. They're a version of our secondary content, which we call character dares. And really they're just practical ways to put these abstract values into action in our own lives. Some of them are truly just for us, for our own development, and some of them are challenges that allow us to role model in front of students what this thing looks like. Here's a simple strategy or a simple example, struggle success. So as a staff, you create a struggle success board. This could be in a staff lounge. It could also be done virtually in a survey type of environment. And the whole premise is to allow people to share with their name or anonymously something they're struggling with and something they're feeling successful about. And you leave it out, and over the course of a week in a physical lounge, you might see more of those cards appear. And in an online world, you might give it a time box of when you can submit this data. And now all of a sudden you have this insight that whether you have names attached to them or not, give you a quick emotional snapshot into your staff, what they're navigating and what they're feeling successful with. Simple, practical thing that allows you to bring empathy to life, even with adults. And you'll notice at the bottom here, there are images pre-built that you could share out with your staff on any given week. These are called staff pursuits. And all of these little guys mean something. This is how much time it'll take, the difficulty, and the number of people involved. So easy to share, easy to process here. There's 4 for each trait, so roughly 1 for each week if you're thinking about this in a month-long, month per trait sort of setup. Same thing applies in many ways to when we start to look at the home component. What are we doing to support families in their own development at home if they choose to do that alongside us? And so we have little family letters home that include an explanation of what we're talking about in school. You'll see some conversation starters and questions you could ask with your kids to sort of echo whatever is being talked about in the classroom. There's books, a book list here if you want to weave these into what you are already doing or offer them the ability to read. And then the final two pieces that I really like, number one is just for your own reading. Now those would be like your power users, the people that really want to dig into this stuff, but just some linked articles or videos to go a little bit deeper on, for example, empathetic parenting, or one of my favorites, Dr. Brene Brown on empathy, where she talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy. So this is literally for my own learning as a parent or as an adult. And then you get down to the bottom here, and you have these family challenges. So in the same way that we have them for staff, we have these pre-built for families to do together, right? To go after the trait of empathy alongside each other. So lots of different ways to do that. So maybe this one example, our emotions pizza. So family draw a large circle on a piece of paper, divide it into segments like a pizza, and each slice of pizza write different emotions, especially your tricky ones to navigate, like frustration or anxiety, boredom, sadness. In the middle of each slice, draw a picture of what that emotion might look like for a family member. Clenched hands, crying. Finally, on the outside of this pizza, we all write down tools or strategies that each member might use to manage that emotion, right? So we're just talking, using something that's like practical and concrete to model and have a conversation about things that we feel, how that sort of plays out in our body, and then ways that we as maybe adults or even asking the students how we might strategize against that or alongside that. And then you are able to give people a slice when they need it. So practical and straightforward in some situations. Some of them are a little bit more concrete, abstract. All that to say, our belief with things like the family letters home or the staff challenges, we always like to say, does this guarantee that people do these things? No, of course not. Should we ever require people to do these things? No, because that's going to work against you. We think about them as opportunities, right? Practical opportunities to show up to the gym and exercise these things when we need to, when we want to, when we feel compelled to. And what we've discovered is even if only 3 adults in the building put something like this into action, well, that is culture change in and of itself. What we've also discovered is that over time, as there's increased buy-in, that more and more adults start to get on board once they see the value of practicing these things themselves. You'll notice at the bottom here, you're able to download this letter home in a PDF. It is never any more than 1 page front and back, which we know is important. You can send it out virtually or physically, and all the letters home are also available in Spanish. Before I get into the meat and potatoes of the classroom content, I'll also just show you briefly the playground content, which can be adapted in, of course, a lot of different ways. Many schools, of course, not going to be in person as we're beginning this year. So some of these things can quickly be adapted to a virtual model. Some of them are just practical exercises that can be used in a lot of different circumstances. But a few different, some of them are activities, some of them are frames for some classic games that students already know or know how to play. And those all live in the playground section here. 2 other pieces to point to before we get into the classroom component. One here is the reading list, which we know educators love, just having this sort of repository of resources that are pre-linked to you. So you can go and purchase that book quickly and easily. It gives you a little summary of what it's about. And it's separated out by grade levels to be developmentally appropriate for those students. So it's a quick, easy way to access those book lists if you want to target your read alouds or things like it to whatever the trait you're focusing on that month. That's kind of the whole theme, right? What can we do to encourage the weaving in the best we can to integrate this as opposed to having it feel like one more thing? Finally, you come up here into resources and you'll see a lot of different things like implementation plans, pre and post assessments, as well as alignments for the classroom content to ASCA standards and CASEL or any of those things that a lot of districts are require to look at least to know how does this thing match up to some other things that we're already working on. I'll come back to this page in just a moment because this piece of the puzzle will be relevant here in just a second. Excitedly, one of the things we introduced just a few months ago was a PreK component. One of the cool things about having content and curriculum online is you don't have to buy a whole new kit or package whenever a little tiny update happens. And so PreK, for example, got added to all curriculum users. That comes in for free. There's no additional cost to the PreK content. And so across all 10 traits, we built out content for those extra littles. And they are broken down into a few different categories. The PreK toolkits have a series of starters, so ways to start your class. Maybe it's in an opening circle or something like it. So anytime it requires images or something like that, they are built in, so you can just click and project. And there's some activities. They are built in the order of how long they are, roughly. And so you'll see a few different activities to focus on empathy. And then there's some practical ways to end the day. Some really fun, adorable babies there. And all the way at the bottom, this one's the thing I'm most excited about from the PreK lens. We have a whole separate book list that is PreK specific, and attached to a few of the books in each one of these lists are pre-built little activities that you could do if you're reading that book aloud in some capacity. You could use those activities alongside the book to sort of strengthen the message. That said, let's get into the toolkit for the classroom proper. I come in here and I'm looking at grades K through 2, and you'll notice that the tab here says start intentionally. And if you follow along down this whole thing, it is start intentionally, engage relationally, respond with empathy, values practice consistently, and exit intentionally. You break it down into a classic acronym, it spells SERVE. We use the SERVE model in a lot of different ways. Inside of CharacterStrong, we use it as sort of a nice filing cabinet for a lot of different practical relationship building or community building, or sort of even philosophically how we engage from a social emotional learning perspective as a school. We use it inside the Purposeful People Toolkit to divide up what could feel like a lot of different tools and content, resources, and activity into some categories. So I like to think about it as like a color-coded notebook that allows you to easily find what you need for any given circumstance. So as an example, I'm looking at empathy, grades K through 2, start intentionally. What does that mean? Well, everything inside of this folder or this part of the notebook are practical ways to start your class intentionally. Now, there are ways to start your month intentionally, each week intentionally, and each day intentionally. So let me break that down just for a second. At the beginning of each month, it'll always be consistently just focused on the word itself. So coming back, making sure we're speaking a common language. These posters are available for download. You can project them, print them, whatever you want to do with them. But empathy is the ability to understand and connect to the feelings of another. If you want to go deeper on that, of course, there's like prompts for conversation, and almost always there's an extension of some kind that might include a video. Obviously, this little portion right here lends itself very naturally to virtual learning. You can project the video, the poster, and have that conversation. You come down here to start the week, and the premise behind these images would be at the beginning of each week, using an image to inspire conversation around that given trait. I love the idea or the power behind just showing an image and how without any words involved, it can spur a conversation about something like empathy. As an example, here's one of my favorites. It's the cheetah and the sloth. Cheetah is struggling, as Joyce is demonstrating for us. Cheetah is struggling to move as slowly as the sloth. And so while they might move at different speeds, that doesn't mean that that one is worse or better than the other. We have different gifts, and understanding is a part of empathy. So this would be a prompt for students to say, like, okay, what does this image tell you about empathy? Or what could you learn about empathy from this image? And I love that students almost always have way more brilliant answers than adults typically come up with for something like this. All of these images are also supplied as line art. So you could use them as printables for like coloring and sort of mindful activity like that. Or you could even use that as part of the processing of the image itself. Then you come down here to start the day. The start the day features quotes that relate to that trait. So as an example, Barack Obama here saying, learn to stand in somebody else's shoes, to see through their eyes. That's how peace begins. It's up to you to make that happen. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world. Originally, we thought about doing one quote a day for all 30 days. And then thankfully, some smart elementary teachers were like, I think we actually need to spend a week on this quote and go deeper so that students can actually unpack it and have a sense of understanding around it. So the idea would be, in one implementation version, is on Monday, you would use an image to start the class. And then Tuesday through Friday, you could spend time unpacking this quote. It doesn't have to play out like that, but if you're thinking about an average week, that is one way you could start each day with a focus, even in a very small sort of 5 minutes a day sort of environment, you could focus on that trait. And so day one would involve usually some sort of vocab, making sure that students understand what's inside the quote. Day two is about the biography of the person. And typically, we're trying to draw a line between who is this person, and for empathy, like has empathy played a role in their life? And then day three and day four are reflection sort of questions to allow students to think, or journal, or share, and hopefully put it into action in their life, or just reflect more deeply on the topic. The goal with these was to get a whole lot of different perspectives and faces, and it was important to us to bring people's identity, right, their face, so people could see who they were as opposed to just the quote itself. And so you'll see that in a lot of different ways. You have Susan Sarandon, Oprah Winfrey, and Maya Angelou as an example for just the K through 2 section. And then you'll notice down at the bottom here, all the quotes have also been translated into Spanish. Coming here to engage relationally. So if start intentionally is about how you start each class, the engage relationally sort of the part of the toolkit is, I think about it as practical, purposeful forms of play, right? So maybe not your traditional full lesson plan where there's a whole debrief and discussion. In some situations, you'll find a discussion, but you'll also notice that a lot of these are really more just like short activities that could be used to bring that activity to life. So you come down here, the engage relationally part of the toolkit is divided up into 10 to 20 minute activities and 1 to 10 minute activities. So things you can find sort of more quickly based on how much time you feel like you have. Things like I statements, you come down all the way here, you'll notice empathy detectives includes a worksheet. Anytime there is something that will be student facing, it'll always be available in Spanish as well. And you come down here to toss the feelings. It's a fun activity that I was super excited that built. The whole idea is you have a beach ball, and on each different section of the beach ball, you write a different feeling word and you toss it to a student wherever their thumb is. They look at the word, they say it out loud, use it in a sentence, or even describe a time where they felt that thing. Cool, practical way to incorporate play and build an emotional vocabulary alongside it. Obviously, something like toss the feelings doesn't play as well in virtual learning. So one of the things that I wanted to show off today, if I were to come up here, is the virtual toolkit. What I'm excited, as I just demonstrated with that start intentionally portion of the toolkit, is that there is a lot of things that are very visual, right? We have illustrations, we have quotes, we have videos. All of those things can be adapted really naturally into an online environment. But some of the ones that are more activity-based might feel a little bit more abstract, complicated. So we built a little virtual toolkit to help aid as you're coming back to school, ways to think about some of these tools. There's a little video of me talking about how this toolkit works. And then there's the menu of traits themselves. So as an example, let's go to empathy. It'll show me the poster. And then here is toss the feelings, which before was a physical ball. And if you read through the instructions here, you'll notice it is now a virtual ball. So I could toss the ball, for example, and just because I see Joyce on the screen, if you're willing to, Joyce, unmute, what color would you like to be tossed towards you?
Purple.
Purple. So I click on purple. It's like I just threw the ball, and the word is afraid. So the idea would be you'd say afraid out loud, and then you would use afraid in a sentence, or talk about the last time you felt afraid, right? So simple way to practice that vocabulary. And then Joyce could pass it to someone else in class by saying their name. They say a new color and it pulls up a different word. So even though previously maybe this activity felt like it couldn't be adapted, the goal with this virtual toolkit is to show off a few ways that they can. That with a little bit of creativity and maybe a little bit of slide ingenuity, we can build out some of these things. And in some ways, do things that we might not have even thought were possible before. So another example here, one of my favorites, the classic don't touch the ground balloon game as an opportunity to show off your perseverance. The whole idea is when I click on this screen, a topic will come up and the balloon will start to drop, and students could use the chat box or have themselves unmuted and they have to shout out an answer before the balloon touches the ground. So name a classmate and you have to say a word. I used to play, I was an only child. My parents had a large California king bed and they would just hit balloons to either side of the bed and I would be dripping sweat at the end of this game. So this is nostalgic for me. A little bit different premise, name 2 cereals and you have to say something before the balloon hits the line. Now, what's really fun about this is if I exit out of this, you'll notice that this is all built in here for you. But if I click this button here, it'll allow me to make a copy of these slides to use myself. So it's created a custom copy for me as the educator. So I can go in here and let's use empathy as an example. I can change out what these words are at any given time, and I can use that activity again with new words. So as the teacher, I can build that and customize all these different traits to however I need. So we've pre-built some of those things for you to hopefully make that transition to virtual a little bit easier. Even if something feels like, well, this can only be done in person, this toolkit is designed to help us reimagine what's possible in the virtual learning world. Let's dig back into empathy. Respond with empathy. In the respond with empathy category of the toolkit, we think about this as meeting students' social, emotional, and physical needs. What we know is that students sometimes need a moment of regulation, an opportunity to calm down. We also know that sometimes students need an opportunity to move and get some energy out. So we've created a set of tools that allow for both of those to happen with a focus on whatever the trait of the month or the trait you're going after at the time is. So you'll see some mindful moments here that includes some of them are simple videos or little mini meditations or mindful practices. Some of them are more activities that we have spelled out or created for you. And you come down here to some brain boosts. There's opportunities to sing or dance that we've pulled from different parts of the internet. And then there's also little mini activities that could get kids up and moving. You'll notice the final piece of the Respond with Empathy toolkit are scenarios. So you could, if you'd like to do some role playing to put empathy into action. V in the SERVE model stands for values practiced consistently. This would be the most traditionally curricular part of the toolkit, meaning these are typically 15 to 30 minutes long. And they're like traditional activities in the sense that there's something that you do and then you talk about it, right? So it's that idea of activities-based learning where you do something, then you process or debrief as a group. Here's one of my favorites, shadow and super selfies. Make sure every student has a piece of paper. On one side, they're gonna draw a self-portrait of their super self and a self-portrait of their shadow self. This activity was inspired by Barbara Gruner, who I believe is on the call right now, who helped build a huge chunk of this toolkit alongside us. And Barbara at her school, she was a counselor for 35 years. And at her school that I got a chance to visit her at, she had monster selfies on this wall. And I thought they were so fun and so silly. She said, yeah, sometimes students really like that outlet to draw out something that they were afraid of. So I thought, how could we apply that to empathy? And that's where shadow and super selfies was born. This whole idea that we all have times where we don't act exactly like we want to, and we all have times where we act totally the way we want to, and talking through that, articulating that, drawing that out can be a really healthy practice. Final piece of the SERVE puzzle So if we're going to start intentionally, we better exit intentionally as well. So at the end of the month, we come back to that definition and we say, has this changed? How do we look at this now that we've spent the month talking about it? And then opportunities to exit the week and exit the day with a practical focus on that trait. So exit the day is going to be the most sort of low burden thing, a little practical mini exercise that helps keep us focused on the trait at hand. And the whole premise behind the toolkit in general, if it hasn't become clear, that it's designed to integrate into what you do on a daily basis. So if you need that moment of regulation or a brain boost, let's not just use some random activity. Let's use something that targets the trait that we're trying to build in or cultivate. If we're already doing opening and or closing circles, why not have a little strategy that puts a focus on the trait that we're focusing on that month so that it feels more naturally woven into everything that we do? Not another thing on our plate, but a foundation. It is the plate upon which we build everything. Some might be asking the question or wondering, I see this as grades K2, and then there's grades 3 through 5. How does that work? Are kids going to experience the same thing repeated? To which I have two answers. The first one is potentially, if that is the way that you'd like to implement, that it is possible that, let's say, for example, I'm a student in grade 3, and maybe I see this image, and we come back to it a year later in grade 4, or 2 years later in grade 5. I'm of the personal belief, our favorite quote at CharacterStrong is we need to be reminded more than we need to be instructed. So coming back to an image like this, I think is powerful because we could learn something new, or B, if I'm in 5th grade versus 3rd grade, the way I see things are going to change. I think that's cool. I might come back to an activity that I really like, and I get to do it again through a new lens now that I've learned more. That said, there are enough tools in this toolkit that students would never repeat something if you chose not to. How do we make sure that? Well, I told you earlier we'd come back to this page mainly to focus on this portion right here, which is implementation. What's exciting, and this is actually coming out just this week, we'll be adding it to the resources in the toolkit. You'll notice here, oops, come back. You'll notice here is a implementation PDF that tells you, hey, if you're doing a flexible implementation, which means you want a little bit of everything on different days, and you want to make sure that no one repeats. Cool, we got you covered. We have it broken down so that whether you're in kindergarten or 1st or 2nd grade, those things are broken up so that no one ever repeats the same thing twice. But maybe you want a daily integration. And so when we built these implementation guides, we broke out that serve model across an entire week. And so that each day has a different letter of the serve model, making sure that whatever grade you're in, you're not going to experience the same activity twice. So we have week 1, week 2, week 3, come down all the way here, but you're like, maybe I don't have time for the daily integration. Let's do something a bit more traditional, like that 20 to 30 minutes per week. What would that look like? Well, week 1, kindergarten, this is what you're doing. Week 2, so on and so forth. So we've built these so that regardless of your circumstance, we've provided you with at least some roadmap to make sure that nothing is duplicated and that everything gets covered in some capacity. What's great about these is it's a choose your own adventure. You get to say, I like this piece, but we don't have time for this, this, and this. Cool. The resources are going to continue to grow with the intention of there being lots in there for you to use as you need. So what's coming out at the, hopefully integrated by the latest early next week, the team has been going to work actually linking these and making them in a Google Doc as opposed to a PDF. Much like the Google Slides, we've found that schools really like to take these and break them and make it their own. So we want to make that easier for you, meaning all of these are linked directly to where these things are in the curriculum. And it's in a Google Doc, so you could say, you know what, for my educators, from my school, we're not working on this piece of it, or we're not going to be incorporating these books. So you can edit this and send it out yourself to hopefully make that a little bit easier on you. Finally, with the intention of ease always being the goal, you come here to the resources, come down all the way to the bottom, and you'll find that all those posters, all the illustrations and things like it, all of those are available to download in one place. So you can find them quickly and easily. And when you download them all, you'll also get the Spanish versions attached as well. final piece of the puzzle, the illustrations are one of my favorite things that I've been helping to coordinate as we built these components out. And back in June, the hashtag Amplify Melanated Voices was going around. And I really loved that premise of how do we bring forward Black and Brown voices and illustrators and talents and artists. And so we went to work trying to find some incredible new artists to incorporate into the toolkit. And so one of the new things that's also being added over the next week or two are brand new illustrations for each trait, partially because we know those are going to be valuable in virtual learning, and partially because we wanted to amplify melanated voices. So some of the things you'll be seeing, this guy, his name is X Payne, an incredible artist. This is one of his pieces, one of my favorite pieces he put together. You have Damien, who put together this, well, they created one for every trait, but here is one of his from responsibility. Here is Ashley, she's rad. She just put together this one on courage. And then a new one that is coming out soon, a new friend of mine, Drea. She has these really fun little doodles like this that we're contracting with her to come up with some new illustrations as well. So just to let you know some of the things that are on the horizon. And a final piece, if we're thinking through that lens of equity or social justice, we believe that those conversations need to be woven in very thoughtfully. And so we've created an alignment PDF that shows you in every single trait the activities and the quotes that can be used to have some of those important conversations on race, on justice, on equality and freedom. We've also, one of the things that's being updated as we speak is in places like the classroom toolkit. You come down, let's say, for example, to something like, what's a good example here? Sometimes in these, for example, in these definitions, you might find a word like philanthropist. You might find a word like race. You might find a suggestion like Nelson Mandela was the first Black president. And in those situations where we have opportunities to go deeper, depending on teacher readiness and this type of anti-racism work you're doing in your school, those words will link to a set of purposeful people equity definitions that allow you to go to those things and go a little bit deeper in those conversations. So just a final few pieces there on how we're responding to a few of those needs, the virtual learning component, as well as the social justice issues that we must be tackling as schools as we return. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second. The chat box has a variety of things in it. And I'm gonna pull up whatever questions have been being asked here and see if I can answer a few. Excuse me for a second while I slide things around screens. Always the fun challenge. All right, here we go. All right, a couple questions that have come in. Can you clarify the time on the family pursuits? Someone had an idea, reading lists, great thing to bring your librarian in as well. Our librarian went through each reading list and ordered what we didn't have, and even organized lists of them in the library search on our website. That is awesome. Those are the librarians I love. If that is a resource that's available, please drop it our way. And if it's something we can share with our schools, that would be really, really neat. In terms of the family pursuits themselves, they vary, right? Much like a lot of our character challenges, they'll always have a little symbol that tells you roughly how long the pursuit's going to be. It's either a 1, 2, 3, or 4, I believe. And the whole idea would be 1 would be like a quick win, all the way up to a 4, which might happen over the course of a day or maybe even an entire week where you're focusing or thinking about something. So the goal is to create lots of ranges of opportunities to increase the likelihood that we do even one. So one of them might be a 10-minute activity, another one might be an hour-long activity. Someone asked, are there any Spanish resources? Yeah, everything that is student-facing is available in Spanish. So the definitions, the quote posters, any worksheets that are downloadable, the family letters home are all available in Spanish. Can the balloon be slowed down? Thinking of some students with disabilities. Great question, yes. And part of the reason that we built it the way that we did was to encourage exactly that. So let me actually showcase that for you so I can properly answer that question. If I come in here, showing this off, we looked at this before. Where are we at? Here's my copy. So this little overview video will explain that and how to do it, because there's a lot of different things that are linked in here and some Google Slides magic. I've grown to be, I think, the biggest spokesperson for Google Slides against my will, but I've made it work. And if I come in here and I click on the button animate, you'll see the animation menu pops up right here. And the balloon is set to fly out towards the bottom after the click. So there's a couple ways I can approach this. I can change this, instead of being quote unquote after previous, I can set it to happen on click. And now the balloon doesn't start dropping until I click again. I can also choose to moderate the speed at which it falls, and I can move the balloon, or I can move the line. Right? Lots of different ways to change that dynamic so that the balloon now, name a classmate, I give a second for processing, I click again, it's falling slowly. So because those are built in duplicatable slides, for you to build on your own, you can customize it to exactly what you need. Let me get back to my questions. Should the traits be done in a specific order? Always a great question. The answer is no. They have been provided in a way that a lot of schools actually like to do them. I like starting with courage as an example. But that being said, in the toolkit model, it is designed as a choose your own adventure. In fact, they don't have to all 10 be done necessarily. If you have 6 traits that you're working on in your school, and you want to spend longer time going deeper on those 6 to strengthen work you're already doing, please do that, right? We strongly believe that if we try to do everything, we end up doing nothing as well. So we need to make sure that we're doing the things that already support maybe our school-wide mission and values, our acronym, our theme. So these things are designed to come beneath that or alongside something you're already doing to support it. Are the videos also available in Spanish? Great question. Most of the videos that are incorporated in the toolkit are sourced from online, which means something like YouTube. If you can turn the closed captions on and off, and usually that allows you to change the language that the closed captions are in. So many things in the chat box. I left for too long. I'm overwhelmed coming back. Michelle says, I appreciate the melanated voices, please continue. I often feel like SEL has a strong dominant culture perspective. Couldn't agree more, Michelle. That is one of our promises and commitments here at CharacterStrong, is to actively work to break that model, break that paradigm, and bring forward a lot of other voices wherever we can. Someone says, are you administrator logins? Are there administrator logins? There is not a separate login for administrators. So we get a school-wide login that you share with any staff inside of a building that can be used for your school individually. You can also purchase as a district, and you would get individual building logins either way. So there's no administrator login because there's no necessarily distinct tool that you would need as an admin. Is the implementation guide updated each year? It is updated as we add things to the toolkit. Yep. So one of the great parts about changing over to that sort of Google Docs model is, as we add things, we can incorporate those right into the implementation guides. The even better part is, because you can make a copy of it yourself, you can change those implementation guides based on what you are working on and what you need that year. Someone says, our district uses both CharacterStrong and Purposeful People, and my login is only attached to Purposeful People. Great question. So James, if you're at the district level, as an example, and you have district-wide access, meaning there are schools who are using Purposeful People and advisory, and you want to be able to see both in the same account, just drop us a note and we'll make sure that your account permissions are set up to see both. So you'll notice that mine, you could see everything in there. So if that's the question, we can make sure we give you the permissions so you have access to both of those things. Let's see. Laura Lors is our amazing librarian who did this for us. Joe, thanks for the shout out. Pass it along to Laura that we appreciate her. Also pass on to Laura that my librarian in high school was Volker Volkerts. So I don't know if this is just a librarian thing with the double name situation, but I'm onto something. There's a conspiracy here. Let's see. Children need to see themselves in roles other than what mass media portrays. Absolutely, Sandra, well said. Really well framed. Amazing. I don't see any other, I don't see any other questions coming in, but I will let you know that we have a couple of exciting stuff coming up. If you have any questions coming out of today and you want to go a little bit maybe more specific to my school or my district, we offer district pricing. We offer pricing if you go with multiple schools in district, all that kind of thing. So if you want to chat with John, my co-founder, he's the one who tackles all those calls. He's on 15 to what feels like 400 calls a day. We're not sure anymore, but he's always talking to administrators and district leaders and all things like that, counselors, whoever's going to be implementing to bring this to your school. There will be another walkthrough happening this month, Joe, at some point, probably within the next week or two. So you'll get an email about that. That being said, we can also send you the recording of today's, if that's helpful. Someone says, are there any pre and post evaluations tools? Yes, in the resources of every trait, there are little mini formative assessments for some pre and post data built in there. Kristen said, thanks for the free virtual resources during the spring. Teachers and families loved them, kept families engaged and connected. Nice, that's our goal. We will continue to provide resources that we hopefully feel are meaningful and relevant and practical for you and your families. And Lindsay's going to drop into the chat just so you see it. Link to John's calendar to book a call. That lives right in there. And then if you want to request a sample, if you wanted to dig into the empathy component of what you just saw, you can get access to the entire month of empathy by downloading a sample. So Lynn's just dropped that right there. And two other pieces that are really exciting. We have a relaunching relationally roadmap course that you can purchase individually to help schools relaunch with a focus on relationships. So Lindsay's going to drop that right in there. We'll put all these in a follow-up email if this feels overwhelming. It does for me. We also have a conference, our last one of the summer this weekend, that I'm super excited about, bringing together some amazing speakers on equity, implementation, and empathy. 3 topics that are hyper relevant to our world right now in our schools. And so we have a 2-day little conference coming up this weekend. We already have about 500 signed up. It's going to be incredible, including my friend, Dr. Michelle Borba, who is a boss. You got Aaron Jones and Vincent talking through the equity lens, as well as Jasmine Wright, Clay Cook, Brian Smith talking implementation. It's going to be really good. If you have the time and space available, please drop on in. Kristen says, you have my principal's email. Who can I send my email to? Kristen, go ahead and drop us an email. Lynn's, put whatever email you want Kristen to. There you go, info@characterstrong.com. Awesome. All right, I'm sweating. I'm going to drink some water. But it is so awesome to see you all. I love the smiling faces. There's just something you need, you know this already, but these moments with like elementary educators are in particular, you're so much more smiling and encouraging. It's awesome. You're like, yes, this is really good. So that fills us up. Thank you for the generosity of spirit and the work that you do. And I know the challenges you're facing. Our commitment to CharacterStrong and Purposeful People is just to continue to adapt as we go and continue to build tools that make sure that the content we're delivering is relevant and engaging for the times that we're in. So thank you all for showing up and all of the kind words in the chat. We'll see you again on one of these soon, or hopefully one of the webinars or our trainings coming up. We're always online. Come visit us. Thanks for spending time with us today.